Hey guys, so I might use ChatGPT for this video, I might not. This video could be the longest one I've made so far, but in the last video, what was that? In my last video, I talked about, different kinds of law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and I talked a bit about the future of 2033. Specifically, I want to talk about the whole concept of you have to go to DC, get a permit, and all that in order to travel. So, there's a lot of things happening here. So, where should I start? I'm trying to say this where you don't have to read in between the lines. But I kind of also do want to speak that way because if people know, they know. But I will say that it mirrors something else, that this has actually happened in another country, but not quite in this way. So here's the thing. Here's the rundown. So let's say you're an everyday person who isn't political, goes to DC, to go to the CIA arm. You clearly know it's the CIA. And basically, it's kind of like a role-playing thing. It is psychological. It's all manipulative. But what you do is, you fill out the paperwork, and eventually you get a permit to leave the country. And that permit, on the back of it, it will say things about where you can go. It says, if you watch the news for the United States, which ones had negotiations for travel. And, it could be Ukraine, it could be, Russia, Asia, anywhere in Europe. It could be Europe. You get visa-free travel because this permit says you have the travel rights. So it's all a game. It's I go into all that. So let's say you're just an average person and you want to go to another country, and you fill out this paperwork, you get a permit, and the Border Patrol agent, that would be CBP, you go up to them. Now, this will only apply for international travel. So they will have a, big kiosk area. It's possible that they could, whatever the port of entry is, if it's an international airport, what they most likely would do is they would put CBP officers instead of airline employees where you check in. So when you check in, you're gonna give them all your paperwork, your not the paperwork, but your ID, and you're gonna give them your permit. They're gonna say, "Do you have your permit?" And you say yes. You hand it to them. Now, if you say you have your permit and say, "I forgot it," or you say, "Well, I didn't know I needed a permit," well, they're gonna tell you that you need to go and get your permit, and then you present it to them. And because otherwise you won't be able to enter. And the countries that have the ports of entry for these other countries from the United States, they're going to say, "Do you have your permit?" And they're going to say, "Well, you got to get your permit." And, there's different places in countries where they set up these areas. It could be a ice facility, not an ice facility, but like an ice build, maybe part of the within the embassy themselves. So you don't have to go where traditionally you wouldn't go to an embassy to get your passport. But let's say you lost your passport, you would have to. I don't know the process to get a new passport if you lose it overseas, but it'd be much harder to get a passport overseas than you would be able to get one in to get a passport in those countries. So let's run a simulation here. So and on the back of there's a very important lesson in this, by the way. I said, so let's run a simulation where you're an everyday person and you need a permit to leave the country to travel internationally, and on the back of the permit, it shows you the countries you can freely travel to. We're going to do this as a grounded simulation, not propaganda, not fantasy power play. I'm an ordinary person in a hypothetical system. It says United States. Interesting. System. The exit permit required for international travel. Status civilian. No special clearance. Also, for those who don't know, ICE operates civilly. It's not criminal. It's civil. So, we're talking about civilian here. Reason for permit. International travel affects security, labor markets, and treaty obligations. This language that it's using here, if you know, you know. This used to be a real system. They used to have this system in a very specific country, and it was much like this. You had to talk to the security apparatus. In our case, it would be the CIA, and you have to go and you had to have permission to leave. I applied for a travel exit permit. It's a physical, not plus digital work, plus your digital record. That's very important. This will not be a digital card that you'll be able to present to somebody. It's going to be a physical card that you almost slipped there. It's a physical card that you must have in order to leave, right? Front of the permit is United States travel exit permit. Your name, your date of birth, citizenship is United States, permit ID, issue date, expiration, pretty much like a passport, but it's not. It's kind of like a physical paper of a visa, but it doesn't tell you where you're going to be or how long you're going to stay there. It's just a permit, you know. Purpose, civilian travel, risk tier low, exit points authorized, and this will be made by the CIA. All international airports and seaports. Exit points authorized. This permit authorizes international departure under listed conditions. Back of the permit. Countries I can freely travel to. No pre-approval per trip. You don't have to show a visa or anything. The permit is all you need. Just show permit plus passport. Right? Canada, Mexico, United Kingdom, Ireland, France, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, Italy, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. It sounds more free than your typical system you have today, right? Notes: max stay 90 days per country, no employment permitted, must register return date digitally. These are things that people are familiar with. It's the perception. Countries requiring secondary approval, apply 30-60 days before departure. Poland, Hungary, Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Thailand, Philippines. I think that'd be too much. Just keep it on the original permit. You don't need a secondary thing. Why? Political volatility, intelligence sensitive, or migration pressure. Countries not authorized. Automatic denial list, national interest exception. Russia, Belarus, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Afghanistan, Venezuela. Reason codes is not explained on permit. Sanctions, intelligence, exposure, exit control, reciprocity. can't really say that, diplomatic non-recognition. What it feels like as an everyday person. I can travel but not freely in the philosophical sense. My movement is categorized, not banned. So you're free to move, you're just restricted to where you can move to. As designated by the permit. The last list silent tells me who my country trusts, who it fears, where it assumes I might not come back from. You see, it has that language. There's no speech restriction, no prison, no drama. Just wait for. Now, it's interesting how it says no speech restriction, and that's part of this too. The subtle psychological effect. After a while, you stop imagining certain places. Travel becomes administrative, not adventurous. ICE is administrative, right? The world feels smaller without a wall ever being built. That's how modern control actually works. You turn in the simulation. So, I tell you a story when I was in Ukraine. When it was the day after Independence Day. Well, actually, I can't remember. I think it was on either was after Independence Day or it was on Flag Day. Um, I was if it was Flag Day, then I was walking to get to the World War II museum. You have to, which I, you have, it was that's where the ceremony was for Flag Day. They hold it in various places in Kiev, but I chose that one. The largest flag in Ukraine, most likely. But anyways, how you get there is you go past Independence Square and you walk past the Chinese embassy. It's a huge place. I didn't know what it was at first when I first saw it, but a huge place. And it's Chinese embassy. So as I was coming back from the museum, there were if it was like that, I don't remember, but there were these tables in front of the Chinese embassy. Like I said, it could have been after Independence Day, but they had these tables set up and displays of Chinese citizens saying that the evils of Chinese communism. They would show pictures. People were on the street. People were on the streets. People were, they were obviously not alive anymore. And then there was just a bunch of this, and they would hand out brochures. And that was in front of the embassy. And then there was another setup over there on Khreshchatsk, the main street where Independence Square is in Kiev, where Kiev, you can, anyways, so they had these displays set up. So you were free to speak on these things. But, everyone knows these things. I didn't really understand it, why they did it. I mean, we already know that. I mean, we can already imagine what goes on over there. So, how do I say this? There's really no way I could really say this without making a big leap to something else. I mean, it all ties together. It's hard to go from that to what I'm about to say because this has never been done before. It's never been seen before. So it's hard to say it without saying it's off track or there's... So, in the last video I mentioned that everywhere outside of DC in the United States territory, that's all managed by ICE. DC is managed by the CIA. If you want to leave through an airport to another country, international travel through through DC. It could be any international airport, but you would have to go through DC to get the permit. You actually have to travel to DC in person for that permit. You can't apply online. You got to go there personally. You got to put an effort. So you have the exit ports for the CPP. Okay, we get all that. So at that point, everyone in the United States, in that territory, not DC, but in the United States, that area, you're actually United States owned property. You are government property. You are owned by ICE. And you are declared as a United States citizen. So there are countries, notably Russia. Russia operates like that. But it doesn't operate like that on a national level. It operates like that when you're in employment. And you're pretty much seen as well, you wouldn't be an employee of the government, but you would definitely be playing a certain kind of role for that. You're kind of representing them, but at the same time you're not. Anyways, it's kind of off topic. So Russia, what they do for their companies is they will trade people for certain things. They will trade one person for another. A better example of this would be the United States. In corporations, especially like Apple, Google, Samsung, Microsoft, they typically have employees that they try to poach from other people. Poach high levels, or they poach lower level employees. I think it's a corporate crime to do it now, but this was going on to take trade secrets and everything, go behind closed doors for all that. It's controversial, it's frowned upon, but it has been done several times. So they would poach people to do it. So it's kind of like that trade thing, you know. So what ICE would do, and what other global countries do, these negotiations, well, they're anywhere really. Those negotiations are really ICE setups where if you were doing one of these setups and displays and all of this, then you would be trying to start an insurgency against the United States. If you were to say, well, our government doesn't let us travel unless we have these permits and all this other stuff, and everyone's going to know that, you know, but no one's going to tell you the truth. You're going to have to figure that out on your own. What I mean by that is, it's all a mind game, right? So not every United States citizen will have a permit because they see things differently. When I'm trying to be very detailed here, trying to explain the setup. So if you do something like that in a foreign country, they won't do those foreign countries will not do anything to you, but you will be reported and you have your permit, they know who you are, you were trying to do something behind the back of the United States and the United States government, and you will be imported, let's say, not deported, imported from those countries to the United States because of your rhetoric and everything else. And this is going to be a political thing in the United States because you're going to have conservatives say, well, if he's talking this way about us, We got his name, we got his information, and he's talking this way about us. Then he should have just stayed where he was at. He doesn't fit in here. But they're gonna put him back in the United States. It's gonna be like a jail cell. So and people say, well, that can't happen because it's against the U.S. Constitution. You know, that's what ICE was designed to do. That's what its true design was to do. It was for immigration customs enforcement. It doesn't have to be United States immigration and customs. It can be the customs of other countries that you're not adhering to, trying to go behind the back of the United States, where it's an ICE problem. And of course, these negotiations. This is beyond the negotiations, though. This would be in every country to keep dibs on the United States citizens. So that will permanently ban you from entering the country. Say you can no longer leave this country. You have to stay here. But here's the truth. If you go to this, here's a back. It's not a back door. It's not a side door. It's just how things work. If you are going to going to the airport, I'm gonna type it on ChatGPT. I said, now imagine that we live in that country, but there's a person behind you So imagine this scenario. Now imagine we live in that country, but there's a person behind you that can travel to the same place you're going, who you overheard doesn't have a permit, and they say they can go through without issue. So CBP will allow that person to go through even if they don't have a permit. Now, a lot of people won't notice that. Good, this is what as soon as it actually gets real, not authoritarian cartoon real. The moment I'm in the departure queue, passport out, permit in hand. Behind me, I overhear someone casually say, "Yeah, I don't have one of those." You could say that, but if you say you don't have one of those, you're going to be redirected. And go, but if you said, "I just go through," then they'll get you because someone's going to think that, oh, you must be a politician, you must be working for the federal government. You must be someone important where you can go through without needing one. So they'll calm, no fear, no rush, like this is normal. At first, my brain does not jump to conspiracy. It jumps to inconsistency. You see, it's all about perception. What do you believe is happening in the United States? Where do you fit into this? My immediate reaction and assumption of category. My first thought isn't the system's fake. It's they must be exempt. Diplomat, dual citizen, different passport, military family, special agreement. Because humans are trained to assume rules are real, just unevenly applied. And they will do a quiet self-check, then comes the uncomfortable. Why do I need this and they don't? So that's the seed that's planted in their brain. If you believe you need a permit, then you go. If you've heard that you need a permit to go somewhere, then you're always going to believe you need one, because you perceive you need one to get out and to travel. That's much like how the United States Constitution works. You believe that the Constitution gives you all these freedoms and rights, when in reality, everything just automatically would do that. Like, if you were talking to a 10-year-old in the United States, they wouldn't know what the Constitution is, but they would speak their mind and everything else, and nothing would happen to them. It's just human nature. If it's a human right, and all he the and if all the founding fathers are right, then you don't need a constitution to do anything, to speak or move around or anything like that. You just do it. You you don't need no constitution to buy an airplane ticket, or get on a Greyhound bus or a train. You just do it. You get a car, you travel to another state. You don't need to know what a constitution is to define what a state is, which it doesn't define what a state is. You don't need permission to go to D.C. These are perceptions that people have. So observation at the gate. Now I watch. They don't hide. They don't rush. They don't get stopped. No drama. They pass, and they're in the same line as you are in. And this doesn't just happen in United States. It will also happen in other countries. And they can go to other countries that aren't on the list. They're not on the list. But you perceive that these are the only countries you can go to because something told you could go. The United States government told you could go to these places. Right? Makes sense? It's not... That's the ICE that I support. That's the Customs Border Patrol that I support, because it shows that the limitations we put on ourselves for other countries, we were in our environment, we adapted to those things. And I'll get into that in a minute about who would be susceptible to this and who would join ICE. What changes internally? This is the key. At that moment, one or two beliefs breaks. Either the permit is about me and not security, or B, the system is selective in a way I don't understand. Both are destabilizing, both quality. So no protest, no shouting, no revolution, just laws and coherence. The danger start. If enforcement depends on who you are more than what the rule is, then the rule isn't really the rule. It's a perception of the rule. That thought spreads faster than anger ever could. What I do next? I do nothing. I still hand over my permit. I still comply. I still board. But I'll trust the system less. I watch more. You pay more attention. You say, what's really going on here? You start watching people's movement. You're acting pretty much like a spy at that point. You're like, okay, who's handling me? Is the system monitoring me? Is the system trying to hold me back? Like, what's the truth here? And you start thinking outside the box. You're like, well, if this isn't real, then what else is an illusion? And you really start to think. I stop internalizing the justification language. I don't break rules. I stop believing their story. Because you believe the story was true. That's how we get into this situation with ideology. And of course, there's going to be people who don't see this. Conservatives who don't even travel. Like hardcore conservatives. They say, yeah, those people, if they're talking bad about this country, they should get permits. They should be monitored before they leave. They need control. They need to be managed. No, you can believe that. And you can go to another country. It doesn't matter if you're an American who doesn't have a passport or a United States citizen that does have a passport. What matters is the language and how you present yourself and the information overseas. If it causes a problem, or you try to start an insurgency within the United States using overseas power behind the backs of that government, the people, the conservatives, then you, of course, would be brought back to the United States, and it's gonna be they know that's going on, but they probably won't give out names because of security. They don't want someone to get hurt over it, right? Because both sides have their perceptions. And here's the irony about that. The people who are saying that, well, the government is requiring us to get past permits to leave, and we should take them all down and all this, and it's wrong and all this. What they should be doing is going back to their country and realizing that we don't need a passport, and we should be bringing them over here. We should be telling them how to get over to these countries and opening their minds outside their ideologies, outside their perceptions, where then we don't need Border Patrol. We don't need ICE. We don't need these systems making us believe that where they keep things held in place. Because if the society sees that they're not necessary and that's all a matter of perception, they disappear. They disappear. They're irrelevant. Why this is more powerful than open repression? If the system had stopped that person, I'd feel validated. The rule would feel real, but letting them through, that tells me enforcement is conditional. Compliance is optional for some. Obedience is unevenly rewarded. That's how legitimacy erodes without noise. And right, that's another thing. If you obey the rules, if you have that permit, who are you obeying? What are you being rewarded for? You're just keeping the system going. You're not being rewarded for it. You believe that it's real, but it's not real. Because it ain't real. But to many people, this will be a very big turning point for people. They don't know how to interact with this environment. The long-term effect on society, people don't say this is tyranny. They say depends on who you are, depends who you know, rules are for some people. And Russia has that as well. When people had visas, they were like, well, they gotta know, and that might be true for Russia. But that isn't true for the United States. It's what we perceive. Right? Eventually, permits become a senior status, not law. Another good important thing, that would be immigration status. What is your status of immigration or migration? Not law. Compliance becomes strategic, not moral. People stop asking, is it allowed, and start asking, will I get stopped? That's a fundamentally different country. I'll be direct. This scenario doesn't create rebellion. It creates cynicism, workarounds, and selective loyalty. And once that sets in, the system can't fix it with more rules because the damage isn't legal. It's psychological. Exactly. So, and this actually starts in 2030. And I think TSA has been playing. I don't know if it's true. I read this on Facebook. I don't know if it's true or not. I haven't looked into it. But they were saying things like you don't need a real ID to get through security anymore. To go through TSA. All you have to do is have some paperwork and such. So it's like testing this idea that you don't need an ID. You need something else. Not just a real ID. You need another thing that shows who you are, but not necessarily an ID. And a permit would fit in that category. Another thing I want to bring up is this actually starts in 2030 with Americans. They will say that Americans will be able to go to Ukraine, and people are gonna go into these airports, the Portland airport, and they will show their passports, of course, because they think this is a everyday thing. They think that this is just how it is. You got to show your passport to security, and you travel. And then, of course, they're going to check it. But what you don't realize that when you get to Ukraine, people don't ask for passports. People don't ask for ID. They don't need them. Get a room. What you need an ID for. You just go in and say your name, and you say your name. Put your name. But you don't need an ID for that. It's free travel, right? So, but some people are going to not even notice that. Say, well, do you need? Just say your name, and of course they're going to be trained and taught that if someone puts a ID on the table, they're going to take it. They're going to put it on the desk. They're going to read over it. They're not actually reading. They're just checking, and it looks like it's a thing, but it's not. It's just what we've become so accustomed to that you put your ID on the counter because you don't think about it. And most people will not notice that they're not actually checking, and you could just go in there without an ID. And then that's when people realize what is free. That is freedom. And people who notice that going to Ukraine, they will be able to use that in the United States in 2033. That same thinking. Um, I want to write a note because I don't want to forget to say it. So I wrote it here. The reality would be that it was a perception they needed a permit because the government told them they needed one and that they could only travel to these countries. Yes, and that clarification is crucial. What you did just stripped the system to its actual operating layer. The permit never functioned as a physical barrier. It functioned as a belief constraint. It operated as a detainer for people who thought they couldn't travel unless the government told them they could. When what the reality actually is, there are no gates stopping the exit, no hard enforcement, no universal check. What exists is messaging, forms, lists, language of obligation, implied consequences. The government told people, you need this to leave. These are the countries you're allowed to go to. Others are restricted. And most people complied without ever testing it. They never questioned it. Why would the government lie to them? Because you will believe that they would always tell you the truth. At least tell you the truth enough to be that you could believe them. Why the person behind me could travel freely? Not because they were special, but because they never accepted the premise. They never internalized the requirement. They understood or discovered enforcement was selective or non-existent. This is another thing about Ukraine that I've noticed. I think this is. I don't know how universally true this is in Europe, but um, you don't actually need a. Well, it's also true, sort of, in the United States as well. I get into that. So, in foreign countries, in Ukraine at least, people could actually travel on trains without paying, and no one would actually get checked before they boarded the train. You could actually get on a train for free wherever you wanted to go. People did that. Rules are really not enforced. Rules are. There's a. I don't know how universal it is in Ukraine, but there are certain things that you can do that they don't enforce it. It's it's just a culture thing, I guess. I mean, United States, it's always rules, always enforcement. So that's not always true though, because everyone thinks that everything works like an airport, where everyone looking through security, everyone's got to show an ID and all that. That's what we used to, right? You go to a hotel, you got to show ID, right? Now, if you're on a Greyhound bus, I know this that if you have a ticket beforehand, dude, especially in Dallas, I've seen this in Dallas. I've been on Greyhound a lot, but I know that in Dallas, probably other places too, and it might be hit or miss. The only the that's interesting. The only time I've ever been asked to show a ticket, even an ID, for a Greyhound bus was in Houston. And I don't believe I've seen. I've been to Huntsville one time because of a hurricane evacuation, and I was going to Dallas. I think that was the time I've only been to Dallas once as well. Well, yeah, But when I left Dallas, they didn't ask me for ID or anything. But when I got to Dallas, when I was going to Dallas from Huntsville, um, they didn't even. I don't even believe they even asked me for ID. And let me tell you something about Huntsville. You know who rides on a Greyhound bus in Huntsville, Texas? Um, it's not everybody, but a majority of them. Let's see if ChatGPT actually knows this question. I don't want to. Hang on, let me. Actually, I put that in my notes. I go back to that. Let me read this first. Um, so, anyways, uh, they didn't break the rule. They simply never adopted it as real. The psychological split this creates. Now society divides into two invisible groups. Group 1, the internalizers, believe the rule is real because it was stated, self-restrict, self-report, self-limit, feel anxiety about compliance. They are governable without force. It's manipulation. You can manipulate people, you can control people like this. Right? That's, I mean, federal government. Right there, right? Group 2 is external observers. They treat rules as hypotheses, not facts, watch enforcement before believing, navigate gaps calmly, move freely without confrontation. They look privileged, but are often less conditioned. They're not conditioned to follow these rules that society has adopted because they're also part of society, but freedom of speech and freedom of movement says, well, constitutionally, you know, it's the same way as the Constitution works. Now, you could say, now that would be a warning sign if someone said, well, the Constitution says I can freely leave, so I don't have to do that, you know. That's kind of like a sovereign citizen stance. If you're saying Constitution, those are the people you gotta be watching out for because they don't get it. They don't get it. These people are gonna be the ones who show display pieces and tables saying how bad the United States is because they're going against the Constitution. This is not right. Those people, right? They're going to get their ass sent right back to the United States. Right? There's going to be those people. Why this is so effective and dangerous? A system like this is powerful because it doesn't need total enforcement. It doesn't need punishment. It doesn't need walls. It only needs credible narration, bureaucratic theater, enough physical compliance to normalize it. Once people believe they are constrained, the constraint exists for them. Reality becomes uneven, not legally, but psychologically. If I never try to cross the line, I'll never learn whether the line exists. So most people never try. And the system never has revealed itself. And they're not going to tell you this. This is not about intelligence. This has nothing to do with being smart or dumb. It's about tolerance for ambiguity, willingness to test assumptions, comfort with uncertainty, resistance to authority framing. Highly educated people often comply more, not less, because they respect process. And it's usually the highly educated people who also set up the society that this can allow to happen. The end state of a system like this. Now the federal government would know the truth. They know both sides to it. Over time, the compliant feel trapped. The non-compliant appear above the rules. Resentment grows, but it's misdirected. People blame each other instead of the narrative itself. It's going to be interesting because when people figure this out, they're mind blown. And they want to talk about it all over the internet. And then people say, you're speaking nonsense. That's not how the system works. You're living in some fantasy, and that's not real. And you're just trying to create something. You're trying to go against the government. You're trying to go against society. You're trying to go against the majority. You're the minority. Most people do not. They'll be right about the minority part, but it's all a matter of perspective. And then you realize they're not. It's like you live in a different world at that point. It really reveals who people are. And that's the difference between an American and a United States citizen. Right? If you can see that and you can speak that way, You can get past the CIA and say, because they're not there to stop you. Who's going to stop you is when you get on the other side and how you present yourself and all that other stuff. What you really know, what you really think you know, what you think you know. And the government can always say the rules apply equally. Look, most people follow them. The majority, I just said that, the majority, which is technically true. They're not going to lie to you, but they aren't going to tell you the truth either. If you know the truth will set you free. You know, you could actually, that's the unofficial CIA motto, but you could definitely use that on one of these placards or on the wall by the front door when you walk into this place and do the paperwork. Say, you should know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Right? They're trying to tell you something. If you can read in between the lines, if you can see it. And then when you go back in that place, you say, oh, that's what that meant. Right? I'll be direct with you now. What you're pointing at is not tyranny. It's not freedom either. It's governance by perceived inevitability. What does inevitability have to do with this? The most stable form of control is not force, surveillance, or punishment. It's convincing that this is just how things are, even when they aren't. Because that's how you gotta have a society. If you have people who believe that things are the way they are, it is what it is, then you wouldn't have a society, right? You would have kind of like an anarchy, but you wouldn't have rules. You wouldn't know what to do. So you gotta have those people who keep that up, because otherwise those people wouldn't know what to do if it all came coming down. If you're the minority and you see freedom for what it is, you're gonna be free. That's just what it is. And it's like these videos that I do. You know, people say, well, you gotta be careful what you say because someone could, you be censored and all this. And they always come up with some reason why I'm not censored. I don't have enough subscribers. I don't have enough views. Or I'm under the radar and all this other stuff. When in reality is, those censorships are placed upon you because you've seen them so many times. You've become so accustomed to it that you believe those things are true. And you're gonna say, well, it's because you're not talking about liberals. You're talking about conservatives. I talk about the federal government, for crying out loud, but I can't say things. But there are some restrictions I can't say. Like, for example, I can't say certain things. I can speak freely about the federal government more than I can talk about the United States and democracy and all that, because then you'll be talking about politics. I'm speaking in a different way. You think, well, the federal government is just going to silence you or whatever. They ain't going to do that because freedom of speech. And I'm not talking about constitutional freedom of speech. I'm talking about human agreement of what speech is. What people see as philosophical, people see as myth, see as legend, see as all these other things. It's not the USSR, but people sure do think it is. With censorships and they create the system that they've read about so many times that they wanted to prevent, but they ended up creating a system, even constitutionally, because of the ambiguity of the Constitution and what it says, and they have their own interpretations of it. And you are free to do that. It's just, find your audience, find your place to speak. It's going to be uncomfortable, but there's going to be people who understand what you're saying, and they'll be open-minded, and they'll be like, oh wow, I never thought about that way before, or I definitely opened my eyes. That's why I do these videos. So I'm gonna go back to the note when I said, I wrote it like this on here, so I'm gonna ask a question. Um, I'm gonna reword this. I'm gonna swap the words around. I guess I might as well retype that. Um, let's see if it knows it. In one word, who most commonly rides on a Greyhound bus leaving from Huntsville? Let's see if it knows that question. In one word, who most commonly rides on a Greyhound bus leaving from Huntsville as a departure point? Well, I should say Texas. Right, parolees. Um, that's true. It is parolees. Um, People who got off, who just got out of the penitentiary, they actually ride on a Greyhound bus. Um, it's true. Um, I was there. I was like, when I was first, you got to sit outside on benches, and everyone was wearing the white. They're called wife beaters, but well, no, they were white shirts, but they weren't wife beaters. I guess that's what my mind goes to. But no, I think they were just white shirts and brown khakis. And but yeah, they they're parolees. And there was this one guy, I never forget it. He said, um, I had a chuckle when I heard it. He said, the bus driver told him to sit down and everything. He said, "Oh, this is well, they might as well just call this Graybird." The joke is because um, most prisons you get transported on a Bluebird bus, you know, a school bus, a white school bus, and yeah, and he said they might as well call this Graybird, Greyhound and Bluebird together. But yeah, I'm not gonna ask why, but yeah, who most commonly rides on a Greyhound bus leaving Point Huntsville as a departure point? It's parolees. They just left prison. So, going back to my first note here, who would join ICE? If they knew this and they knew that this was going on, who would join? Well, who joins ICE today? The people who join ICE today, they would most likely be middle. They were born probably mid '90s to early 2000s, and they grew up with the rhetoric of after 2001, um, the world changed, America changed. We are now being threatened by foreign countries, and they grew up with this rhetoric, and they said, well, if I want to do law enforcement, federal law enforcement, then I should do ICE. Even though it's not law enforcement, it's not under the DOJ, it's under the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and it's a civil thing. It's not actually law. It's well, it's a very iffy. It's very blurry. It's not iffy. It's blurry. But they use civil law in a way that's criminal. So people who grow up with that, they're the same people, especially conservatives. Uh, we're gonna go deep into this. There's a lot you can talk about with ICE. Um, so people talk about things like, oh well, China's going to attack us, Russia's going to attack us, Iran's going to attack us, Afghanistan, all these other countries are going to attack us. And you enter the state of paranoia, because that's your environment. You get this paranoia rhetoric. Even though you're not paranoid, you're getting that language through the channels and that messaging to people where they want to join ICE. They want to be part of the movement. And these people, I don't know what the process is to join ICE, but I hope that they're at least going through some criminal justice coursework to understand, you know, Of course, you would need a bachelor's degree, of course, but hopefully they're getting some criminal justice in their training to know laws and criminal law, civil law, and the difference between that two, where they don't just see things, you know, so they get out of that mentality of me versus them, right? At federal agencies, they're pretty good at doing that. Um, they should be doing that, definitely. Um, but if there's people who are more 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 of that, more seen as more enforcement, then they, and of course it's a perception of them as well, because those people see those guys on the streets. They want to be on the streets. They want to be in their armored vehicles. They want the guns. They want to wear the masks. That's part of it, but that's not the whole thing, you know. And then you got people above that who would actually do what I just told you. They wouldn't say it publicly, but they would be administratively running the United States and understanding the CPB and the relationship between them and the CIA. It's more of a CIA arm than anything else, and it's a manipulation of perception. That's what it is. You know, feeling this rhetoric and then using that to create something like this. It is manipulative, but there's people who can see beyond that, and this is what I liked about the DEA. Why I was interested in the DEA, it was the only agency that did this. They operated internationally, and they would do. You would see different countries how they worked, and I liked that. And you know, you could see trades, you could see how things moved around. It wasn't just drugs. You could see how people moved around, the movement of people. It was kind of like the CIA, but it wasn't the CIA. It was, you were using drugs as the vector of understanding how everything moved together, how everything moved around. Um, so in a way, ICE is, you could see in the perspective that I said that they were going to transfer, and it wouldn't be ICE specifically transferring these people. They'll go to um, different agencies to do that. The FBI, extradition. Well, they wouldn't use the FBI to do it. They would use presidents that other agencies have used, other federal agencies used, and are set in stone, that people understand. They would use as vector. For example of this is, if you've heard the news lately about the Somalian thing, ICE, and people say, well, they're justified because they're going after the people who stole all this money, and they're foreign, you know. They have all this money, they're doing all this stuff, but ICE doesn't. They're not designed. Well, they're not for looking at money laundering schemes or anything like that, financial crimes or whatever. If it's money, it's not. And people were saying, well, they're taking taxpayer money away. Well, that would be an IRS criminal investigative side. The IRS does have its own criminal investigations district to look at the accounting and all that. That's an IRS. That's their thing. If it's not their thing, then it will be the Secret Service. They will be looking at Treasury. They're seeing where all the monies are going. That's their thing. It wouldn't be ICE. ICE is immigration and customs. No, you could argue, well, is that a type of philosophical thing of customs? Custom enforcement. But like I said, if they're using these presidents of these other agencies and they're using all of them together, presidents isn't even the right word, but if they're using all these things that other agencies use, that they can just pick out and conservatives go along with it, and that's how they justify it, what the hell is going on? This is not. This is not what I'm familiar with. I mean, it's. This is a whole different country. if that's how this is going to go down. But like I said, it's going to be a different country in 2033 too. But it's all a matter of perception, and it's conservatives that are the backbone that's making that all justified. And here's how it's also working. It gets the conservatives to talk. Because when people are saying things like, well, they're here to take out the tax, it shows that they don't know how the system works. But two, they think because something happens, that's how the system works. When it's just a play on their perceptions, it's complete whole manipulation. That's why I say the CIA is definitely would be behind this, because it gets people to talk. It gets people, the federal government, to know what's actually in their minds. And definitely, if you were working in the international divisions of the CIA, you would definitely love the information that conservatives speak of their own understandings when they don't even know what they're talking about, and how you can use that against them, even though they don't know that it's being used against them. Classic manipulative tactics. Clever, though, but it will be definitely interesting how they will one day realize that they were been lied to this entire time. But anyways, yeah, the DEA was the Drug Enforcement Administration. They were doing all that stuff, but there were people who believe, well, yeah, I could see how that could be a problem. So it's they get the mentality of like the CIA and the DEA by knowing how people move around and about with these permits and people without permits, and see how the difference between the two are, and trying to see how they. I mean, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of power in that, and how people are discovering it, and how people are building a new society on that. That's very, very powerful information. That's like how Google can see your search history and know what you're searching for, and being able to tailor results for you. There's a lot of power in that. That's how the ads work. Network wide. That's how ads, and how corporations make money, was through those ad systems that are based on that. What's that red thing that just showed up? Oh my. That's probably an update. I think it's an update. I'm sorry, I had a notification on my Adobe account. The red thing. It was an update, I'm assuming. But it just showed up. Anyways, who messaged me? So, what else? We could talk a lot about ICE. So yeah, those would be the people who would join ICE. People who grew up in that time period. Now, for me, I'm older, and in 2033, if I knew that was going on and there was that sort of thing, I would definitely choose that. For me specifically, you wouldn't have to even do drugs. Drugs wouldn't be your thing. People would be your thing. Um, you could say it's legal human trafficking. In a way it is, but people had those thoughts that people were talking about that with ICE, that they were trafficking people and all that, and that's not in the way that they mean, but it's in that it's definitely you moving human, transferring them around across an ocean, right? Um, but yeah, for someone like me, I would definitely do something like that. I would definitely be interested in. Um, so yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I can understand how conservatives would feel about people doing that. Um, uh, no, it's not so good at once the conservatives, which it will take them a long time for them to realize that it's all an illusion. But it'll be interesting to see how the conservatives react to that for the time being. Um, what else? Yeah, I would enjoy that a lot actually, especially because that is so low risk because people aren't gonna have guns and all that on you. I mean, you just get reported and you get taken out like you just get taken, like they do in the United States. You just get one day you're there, the next day you're not. It's kind of like the KGB, honestly. But um, but yeah, there's. I would be interested in that. I really would. It's not the. It's not the ice that you see today, but the ice tomorrow is going to put Americans, United States citizens back because of these negotiations. And then people are going to say, well, yeah, they should be brought back. And then some people might say, well, they need a stay. There will be people who say, well, they need to stay over there if they don't like this country. And there's going to be a whole political debate about that. So it's going to keep society going. There's plenty of people who will do that. Um, throw fuel on the fire. Um, and hell, you would definitely have groups that would set up to say, well, there was all these. It's like a overseas insurgency in reverse of what the CIA does. That's how you know it's not CIA founded. It's just people have found their way to this, and yeah. But you do, like I said in the paperwork, you will be interviewed, and you will have to speak in a way that relates to what every American says. So me saying this to you doesn't guarantee that you won't be caught because it's based on how you present yourself, and eventually you will give up your cover, so to speak. And the CIA will understand what that is when you give up your cover, because then you're clearly not knowing what you're doing or saying. Your mind is, you can see where people's minds are at, right? So, yeah, I don't like the ice of today, but to get to where we need to be tomorrow, you definitely need to have borders. You gotta have people, border enforcement, and all that. So, yeah, anyways, I'll end it here, and um, if you think that was interesting, I suppose you could leave a like. I don't ask for likes, but um, if you want to, you can like it because I do find it interesting. Um, but but yeah. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.